Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Vietnam Innovators. It's your host, Hảo Trần, here for another round of innovating stories about what's going on in Vietnam. Thanks for your support over the many years that we've been doing this show, and of course, for tuning in every single week. Today's guest is a guest from the UK. His name is Chris Sheldrick. He is the CEO and co-founder of What3words. What they do exactly, the name of the company kind of implies. It's a combination of three words and related to maps and locations. I'll kind of let Chris explain the rest of it. But before we do that, I'll kind of set the tone for why Chris is on the show. As you guys know, the borders have reopened here in Vietnam for a couple of months now, and there's been a flow of companies and business travelers coming back to Vietnam, Chris being one of the first, actually, I'm sure, amongst that group. And we actually met during a tour that was arranged by VinFast, which is one of the clients of Chris's company, VinFast being the electric vehicle maker. And they've arranged a tour throughout all of Vietnam. We met in Hanoi, though, where we got to see the VinFast electric vehicle factory, and a lot more that Chris maybe will touch upon later. Anyways, we met during this tour, 6 a.m. at the Metropole Hotel in Hanoi. That was the only time we had available, and I'm very glad we were able to connect. Chris, that's enough from me. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Hal.
Chris, let's just start off. Who are you? What do you do? Let's just start with something short and sweet.
Sure. So I'm CEO and co-founder of What3words. So we're a global address system. As you touched on, we divide the world into 3-meter squares, and we name each 3-meter square in the world with 3 words from the dictionary. So something like table, chair, spoon is the name of one of our 3-meter squares. Coffee, branch, pyramid is another. And we literally have enough combinations of 3 words that we've done that all around the world, from Alaska to New Zealand, everything in between. 3 words for 3 meters.
Excellent. And, in the context of Vietnam, before we get into the details of the startup journey that you've gone through, I'm sure you use Vietnamese language too, it sounds like, not just English. Yeah.
That's right. So we do the system in 51 languages now. And so if you are a Vietnamese speaker, those words that I just mentioned would be in Vietnamese. And you can navigate anywhere in the world using 3 Vietnamese words, even if you're in the Brazilian rainforest. But it obviously covers all of Vietnam first, because we think it's important, if someone's going to use a system like this, that people can do it in their first language, their native language. And we're trying to do even more languages to get global coverage.
Okay. And Chris, let's just start off with the problem you were trying to solve. Here in Vietnam, and to our listeners here in Vietnam, I'm sure we have a lot of issues related to maps and locations. Like, there are houses down alleys, there are new buildings being built almost every day that don't have an address yet, and it's hard to get around. But I'd like to hear from you what that kind of challenge you saw, your team saw, when you created the company. What was it exactly that inspired it?
Yeah, well, when we started the company, I think it was my personal issues with addressing, which had just bothered me for my whole life. You mentioned some examples from Vietnam. In the village I live in here in the UK, nobody has a street number. We just have a house name and the village name. And nobody's ever really been able to find my house. I live on a farm, and for years we've tried to get deliveries, and people just kind of sail past on the main road and just don't have any way of being able to type anything into a mapping app which will bring up my house. So I think, to start with, I was just kind of annoyed by addresses and postcodes, going, why are these not kind of universal? Why is my village kind of left out? And then I worked for 10 years in the music business. I ran a music business. We put on large scale events around the world. And I was the guy who had to organize everybody getting to sort of the back of the stadium to load all the equipment in. And it's as simple as, you try and put an address and some directions on a schedule for everyone. And then at 5 minutes to 4, everyone calls you in a panic going, I've put the address in, but I'm by a lamppost and it doesn't seem like where I need to be. And it just kind of dawned on me, addresses sort of work some of the time, but not all of the time. And we're a long way into the world of tech without a solution to this. So I actually tried to get the London music business typing in GPS coordinates, so the latitude and longitude. And I used to give out on the schedules these 8-digit latitudes, 8-digit longitudes, and people said, Chris, this is very complicated. Why are you doing this? And so I guess the idea I had was, well, you've got a system like this, which is very accurate, GPS coordinates, but nobody uses it really. No normal person uses this in everyday life. So if you could condense 16 numbers into something really, really easy and memorable, maybe we could create a global system that everybody uses, which is a 3 meters accuracy. And really, I mean, I chatted about it with my friend Mohan. It was kind of, how do we make such a system? And it was just really finding out, when we threw these ideas around, that there's enough combinations of 3 words. That's kind of the thing. You've got to fill 57 trillion 3 meter squares with something unique. And you can do that because there are enough combinations of 3 words. There's more than 57 trillion, in fact. So that was just kind of how the idea came about. And I was so taken with it, I just dropped what I was doing in the music business and was like, right, we're going to set up What3words. And that's how it got started.
Okay. And that was 10 years ago, you said?
Yeah, nearly. So no, 2013 we started. So yeah, nearly coming up to 10 years now.
So over those years, how many users of the platform are there now?
So we're used across 191 countries, millions of users, which is fantastic. Our biggest market is here in the UK, which in some ways is bizarre because people say the UK is the best addressed country in the world. I mean, I would disagree with them from my personal experience. But either way, we are definitely a household name here. You can use us for things like deliveries when you order anything with DHL, with DPD. Hermes, the big delivery companies here, in their apps, you can actually go in and input your 3 words, and they'll deliver stuff to your door. Even with the government emergency services, so police, fire, and ambulance, 85% of those you can call up. If you're in the forest and your cousin has a heart attack, you can give the 3 words, and the government accepts it through those emergency services. So, just in many ways of society in the UK. What3words is just known and understood, which a lot of the time people in other countries find kind of odd. They're like, God, the system is these 3 random words which are meaningless to the location. How have you sort of got to that level of adoption? And I guess, we've got good at it over the last few years. And now is the time that we're expanding a lot internationally. We focused on some countries like Germany, Japan, Korea, but now Vietnam is a really interesting country that we're spending more and more time in.
Yeah, let's talk about the Vietnam angle. I mentioned earlier, and you probably had your own challenges coming to Vietnam, Chris. It's hard to kind of find out where the entrance of the door is, let alone the building itself. Why Vietnam? Let's talk about your first customer here. What kind of spurred your interest further in exploring this market?
So I guess we got into it through VinFast, but I guess before that, one of the big applications for What3words has been car navigation systems. So a few years ago, Mercedes-Benz were the first car company to adopt What3words, which means in a Mercedes car, you can either type in the 3 words or speak the 3 words, and the car will then navigate to that 3 meter square. And then after that, we've seen 17 other car companies now follow suit, which includes Mitsubishi, includes Subaru, many of the sort of household name car companies. And then it was, I guess it was only actually about 6 months ago or so that we had a note from VinFast saying they'd heard about What3words and were interested. I then got to meet Madame Tui in Singapore, who is the CEO of VinFast, and she was just particularly taken with the idea. We discussed addresses in Vietnam that in many places is difficult. They're either not accurate or don't exist in many places. But also VinFast have global aspirations, and she was very assured of the fact that, yes, this could be globally applicable to anybody who wants to have a really good experience in your car. The navigation is pretty crucial. In fact, there's many studies which show like people putting stuff into their car navigation is the number one issue that drivers have. And so I think she was incredibly keen that What3words should come to the cars, both for Vietnam, but also globally. And then not long after, I think it was early January this year, just at CES, we announced the partnership with them and a deal, and it's incredibly exciting for us.
Amazing. So VinFast obviously is a household name here in Vietnam, to be seen on the global stage. Of course, they're just about to start selling, if not already, actually. Within the Vietnam context, you were telling me when you were here a couple months ago that you were talking to some folks, not just in the car industry is one, but in e-commerce, in other applications. Maybe you can share more about how else What3words can be used in different industries or within Vietnam as well.
Right. So I mean, two of our really big sectors are mobility, for which car navigation falls into it. But also ride hailing. We work with people like Kareem in the Middle East, with Cabify in Spain, where you can actually, when you order a ride, you can put in your destination as the 3 words, and it will then take you there. So we kind of have that all as the mobility sector, which is I want to go somewhere, and 3 words you should be able to use that with. So, but the other one is logistics. And as I touched on, in the UK, people like DHL here, you can use it with. And the time I spent in Vietnam, I met with a couple of logistics companies, and I'm going to come back soon. I'd like to meet some more, because it seems that is a very real problem in Vietnam when people are putting in a destination for where they want that e-commerce item to be delivered. Many people have problems with their address. They get called by the drivers, or items get returned saying, actually, we couldn't find the address, this doesn't exist. And so there's a very clear need for something like What3words, it seems. So what we'd love to do soon, once one of those integrations is going to be hopefully completed shortly, is then announce, hey, you can use What3words with this particular company. But really, we want What3words to be a standard that you don't have to think, oh, can I use it with this company? Can I not with this? Ideally, just anywhere that you'd expect to use an address, we'd like you to be able to use What3words. So we're talking to a number of the companies who are doing deliveries, ride hailing, so that anything that you're using with a smartphone and an address, you can hopefully use us.
So you're expanding globally now, and the name is getting out there, both on the B2B side, but also the consumers. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have enough people actually using the application to justify these B2B companies to adopt it, which leads me to my question. How do you guys monetize? What was your breakthrough kind of like, I guess you could say, client deal that allowed you to kind of continue on that momentum and streak where, yes, the UK, you're a household name, but what all these new markets that you're going to, how do you guys achieve that?
So yeah, the first thing is worth saying is that What3words is totally free for the end consumer. So the first thing a lot of people do when they hear about our concept is they go, well, if you've named every 3-meter square in the world, what's my house called? So yes, anybody can download the What3words app. You can use it in Vietnamese, English, or any of these languages, and you can find your house or your office, and you can go to your front door and see the 3 words, and your back door and see the 3 words. That is all totally free for the consumer, and it's totally free to then use it in anything else. So the way we monetize is purely B2B. And that's for any company that will be used to paying for addresses anyway. So I mentioned the car navigation systems, I mentioned logistics companies, all of them are used to paying for addresses, because when they get an address, they have to pay a service to translate that to coordinates to either make the delivery or route the navigation. So actually, we're not inventing a business model or sector or anything like that. We're just going up against traditional addresses and the business model that people have there. So it's pretty straightforward. When you mentioned the breakthrough customer, it's funny. So before Mercedes, the first customer we had was the Mongolian Postal Service, and this was with a guy that I met in China in an event. A Mongolian guy, businessman, and he was really sort of fixated on the What3words idea. And then he called me out of the blue 2 months later and said, Chris, I've just bought a third of the Mongolian Postal Service. And we have real trouble knowing where people live. So it's kind of like, A, can you come to Mongolia? And B, can you develop the system in Mongolian? And I basically said yes to both things and got on a plane. And then we did our first partnership pretty much globally with the Mongolian Postal Service, which is phenomenal. And then even a UK...
ongoing?
Yeah, it's still ongoing. A UK TV show actually sort of challenged it and was sort of like, I wonder if this works. So they sent a letter sort of live on the TV show just with the person's name. They wrote the 3 words, Mongolia, posted it, and the letter arrived. This was on the QI TV show. And yeah, it's fantastic. It's still there. We actually have a team of 9 people based in Ulaanbaatar, the capital. And it's been a brilliant success story for us. So, but it also just shows the versatility of what we're doing. If your customers are the Mongolian Postal Service and Mercedes, and there's quite a few others as well, there really are quite wide applications for What3words. We're also looking at things like drone delivery and all sorts. So that was a really important moment, and have a lot of affection for Mongolia and everything that deal brought us.
I mean, it's helped justify a team of 9 now there. So you started. Let's zoom in on Mongolia a little bit. I want to see kind of like how the go-to-market and expansion of that unfolded. So you started with the post office, which is a great entry point. It touches a lot of consumers and businesses. What were some of the follow-on kind of effects of that first client in Mongolia? Did you pick up other clients? Did people start downloading the app? Like you saw download spikes, or I'm curious how that turned out.
So exactly. So there was a lot of news around the announcement, and that got a lot of downloads, and people just there, like anywhere, interested to go, hey, what are my 3 words? It's just something, as our team have always explained, like people have really grown up in Mongolia using directions more than addresses. It's just sort of the way that things are done. And so this was really a lot of people's first experience with any kind of navigation platform. But then, yes, the mission was, okay, well, actually, we need to get the people that feed the postal service. So Han Bank, which is the biggest bank there, they started putting a What3words field on their forms. If you order a credit card, they had so many problems with missed deliveries that there's now a dedicated field that's still there on the Han Bank credit card application form. And that was kind of first follow-on client number 1. Then I think now pretty much every e-commerce company in the country has a What3words field, so that when you're checking out and you put in your address, if you know it, if it exists, you can then put in the What3words. And then the other logistics companies, aside from Mongol Post, know What3words and are able to use it. And in many cases, it just beams it straight to the driver's phone as a PIN, because it got converted effectively by that business model I explained. And then also there, just like in the UK, the emergency services adopted it because they have such difficulties finding people. So we've sort of got a bit of a playbook for how this how the adoption curve works in a country. And it's good. Like, we had less resources then. Mongolia is only 3 million people. And so you get to understand how to do marketing and how to get network effect in a smaller country, which is very useful if you're then going to go and do the same thing in far bigger countries, like here, the UK, and obviously Vietnam, not dissimilar population. But it was great to understand. And yes, with a relatively small team, that's how we did it. But it's great to have an office there, and some of my colleagues there now work on other markets as well as Mongolia, and it's almost been our sort of Asian office that we have, and we'd like to grow even more.
Phenomenal. That's quite the story. So what's next for What3words? I mean, you're around the globe now, and Mongolia was the first, and you're in other countries now. What's the focus? Are you guys still focused on like the product development? Are you guys focused on just pure audience adoption? What's next for you guys?
So audience adoption is definitely our highest priority. So we get a lot of what I'd call sort of spill into other countries that people now, I mean, if you go to the what3words.com/products page, there are just hundreds and hundreds of things that you can now use What3words with internationally. And then people will sort of find out about it in that platform and go, what's this? You know, if you're in Argentina, they'll kind of look into it, and we get downloads now from so many countries. So by focusing on individual countries, it also helps the global mission, basically. So we cherry pick each nation that we go into. And I think, Vietnam has been somewhat of a bit of a fortuitous thing for us, just from having met VinFast, from having signed a deal with VinFast, from knowing that this is coming to Vietnamese cars, and the fact I've now got to travel to the country. I've now got to see, okay, wow, this is an amazing startup ecosystem, which is growing very fast with companies in all of our target sectors. There is clearly an addressing issue in many parts of the country. And so it just feels like it could be a sweet spot for another country for What3words to grow in. So we are planning at the moment how that's going to look if we scale up on the consumer side as well as B2B. But for our whole strategy as a company based in London, yes, it's about choosing 6 or 7 countries that we really push hard into. But off the back of that, we just get adoption in so many others, which sort of creeps up. And I guess like any company with global aspirations, you hope that after a while you have to push less, because in every country, people have just encountered you in some shape, way, or form.
You mentioned earlier, I mean, this all sounds really rosy and very positive and optimistic. On this show, we also like to highlight some of the challenges, and I'm sure you've heard many times from, potential investors or customers. You mentioned, the traditional map providers are also your competitors. So Google, right? Apple, whatever else is out there. Why choose What3words compared to Google Maps? Why would somebody pay extra for that service when the audience, the user base is smaller? Maybe you can run through some of those.
Sure. So I think it's important to distinguish because we don't make any maps and we don't make any navigation tech, which is an important point. And anyone could be confused for thinking that we do, because when you open the What3words app, you see a map. But that is either a Google map or an Apple map, and we bring in maps from others. So we're not making maps, and therefore we're not competing with those map providers. In fact, our ultimate ambition, as I sort of say to everyone here, is actually for us to be able to delete our app. We're not trying to really build an app, because if you can find your 3-word address in one of the maps you already use on your phone, and then you can put it into your logistics app or your ride-hailing app or your car, there is then no need for the What3words app. So success for us is actually making our own app completely redundant. So I think the only thing we're competing with is kind of what people did yesterday. And what people did yesterday is probably put in either a place name, which, if you're trying to find a small cafe, sure, that's okay, you're going to find it. But if it's a bigger place and you need a specific entrance, yes, we think you should use a 3-word address and not what you did there. If you're somewhere where your address doesn't work, by all means use a 3-word address, either as well as or instead of what you were doing. And so for the B2B companies, it's not a case of paying extra. As I mentioned earlier, they're already paying for addresses. So it's an either or for them, and it won't be any more expensive or cheaper with us. It's just a different service which provides the same thing. So I think really what we're doing is kind of completely new. We have very few competitors, if any, across the world, because to be a true competitor of What3words, you'd have to be making some kind of code for latitudes and longitudes, and there are very few people doing that. I think we're sort of safely in first place, if you like, and the ones with a lot of global awareness. It's just a case of people going, great, if I know about What3words, I'm actually going to use it. And that can be one of the hurdles to get through from, okay, I've heard about this as a cool concept. Great, I'll park that in my brain. To next time, you need to go somewhere, add the 3-word address. There was we have an investor based in Vietnam who I saw the other day, and it was brilliant. On his business card, he'd actually put this 3 slashes and then his 3 words at the bottom of the business card, which is brilliant because he says, everyone says to him, what's this? And it's just a great way of educating people on, hey, I use the What3word system. So for us, competition in the traditional sense is very different. It's just behavior change. How do you get the whole world in a time scale that suits us to stop doing what they were doing and say, coffee, banana, spoon, which on one hand kind of sounds a bit crazy. But as we've seen in the UK, you can just normalize something as crazy as it might sound at first, if it's really providing use and value to people.
Incredible. I want to touch upon the history of the company and the journey you've taken to, especially from a company building perspective. Are you guys venture backed? I assume so. And what's that future look like for you guys? Are you looking to go public perhaps? What's a future partnership look like for you guys? What's the end game for What3words?
Sure, it's a very, very good question. So, we started, as many companies do, with a seed round, for which we didn't have any venture money, and we just found people. Like What3words is one of those kind of, I call it a good idea for raising investment, because some people absolutely love it, and then some people are either confused by it or just sort of say, I don't think this is ever going to catch on. 3 random words, you guys are totally nuts. And so I think it's good having something which polarizes opinion. Because it means that all of the people who like it really like it. And so we raised a good amount of money from angel investors to start with. And then we did institutional money. We got Intel Capital on board. They were the first institution. And then we started bringing on strategics, because we realized that the biggest thing for What3words is credibility and from having attachments to brands people have heard of. So then we brought on companies like Aramex, which is the Middle East's biggest delivery company. They're like a DHL out there, for example. Mercedes invested as well as doing a partnership with us. IKEA, who see this also as something for home delivery, they've invested. Sony, Subaru, both work in the mobility space in Japan. And there's also SAIC Motors, a really big car company based in China. And so we've sort of gathered this great list of big mobility and logistics investors. And it just shows whenever we go into a new market, people recognize a bunch of the logos on your investor list. It gives you that credibility that people take it seriously. So yes, we've raised well. We've got a team of 160 now globally. And yeah, at some point we would love to go public. We're thinking about it, but I think that's definitely a couple of years out. For now, everybody's just very kind of psyched up here about how do we make those next few countries as big as the UK has become. And I think we'll definitely do that before we think about going public.
Let's visualize too. What countries are you guys most popular in? So the UK is number one, at least from people that are using the What3words. Sounds like Mongolia is very successful, but of course small population. What are some of the other countries that you could highlight in terms of audience base, but also success stories?
So in Europe, Germany would be the biggest one at the moment that we're doing. We're thinking about some others here. Japan and Korea have both gone incredibly well. And I mean, the Japanese system is something that sort of baffles many people. It's the only country in the world where streets are numbered in the order that houses were built. So you can have number 1 next to 82, next to 43, which confuses plenty of people, travelers and native Japanese people alike. We're working a lot in India at the moment. So we're partnered with Tata Motors, who are the biggest car company made there, and expanding there considerably. Vietnam is probably our newest market that we've done relatively little in so far, but we're very excited about. And then over in the US and Canada, we've seen a bunch of adoption recently through emergency services, like the Los Angeles Fire Department have taken it. In Canada, it's used a lot for the same thing. And we're making that progression at the moment there from emergency services into the big car companies, logistics, people thinking of drone delivery and all these other kind of companies based out there. They may be working globally, but we have a team out in the US as well. So those are probably the main markets for now. Also the Middle East. I mean, COVID was tricky, as it was for everybody, especially if you're a business working internationally, because you can't travel anywhere. But as you say, I think I was one of the first people into Vietnam recently after they lifted the restrictions. Similarly in Korea, and our team are now kind of back out around the world. But I think it would be tricky to do more countries than that with a team of only 160. Everyone's on a plane a lot. But yeah, if all goes well, then we'll be able to add plenty more countries to that soon.
Cool. And in Vietnam, I mean, you've been coming here. Do you have plans to build a team here? If so, who are you hiring? This is a bit of a plug here if you want to mention anything. I'm sure a lot of our listeners too are interested. What's your plan for Vietnam? And given your playbook here, you're looking for partners, but also maybe staff or a team.
That's it. We would love to build a team in Vietnam, I think. So I would definitely encourage anyone. I mean, like, find me on social, on Twitter or LinkedIn or anything, and just ping me if you would be interested. If you're one of the people who's going, God, that What3words sounds very cool. I'd love to build this out in Vietnam. Please drop me a note, because we are thinking about team on the ground right now. We're going to be working closely with VinFast, but also there's other partners I mentioned across logistics, ride-hailing, e-commerce. And we will need a local team to be able to do that. It doesn't have to be huge. That's one of the nice, elegant things about growing a tech business. But we want somebody who can go and talk to partners and explain what we do. So definitely anyone who's interested, please get in touch. But I think, yes, we would love to put people on the ground. It's something we're doing in every country that we're spending time in.
Phenomenal. These are very cool insights and opportunities if What3words can be brought to Vietnam. So I hope some of our listeners will be following up. Chris, that kind of wraps up some of the main kind of talking points and things that we wanted to bring up on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to add to our audience of, again, mostly Vietnam-based listeners who might be interested in what you're trying to do here?
I think, to be honest, we covered so much of it. Vietnamese was one of the sort of funny anecdote. It was one of the languages that kind of broke a lot of our tech, because I think it's the only language in the world, or certainly the only one we've done so far, where you have spaces within the words. And I think we hadn't sort of reckoned on that when we built how our tech was going to be structured, but we were very proud to have sort of launched Vietnamese successfully, being able to support spaces between words. And then we had so many talks internally here in the UK on the Vietnamese language by our languages team, so everyone understood this outlier. So I really would encourage anyone listening. We're sort of very proud of the Vietnamese version. Please do download the app, find your 3 words for your front door in Vietnamese. Hopefully you like the words. If you don't, maybe move 3 meters to the next square, and let us know what you think. But yeah, any feedback on the product is massively appreciated. So yeah, What3words is in the app stores, and we'd love to hear from people.
On that note, I do have one more question for you. The old language team, did you have to bring on a consultant for every language to kind of advise how that would work? And what is that rollout implementation process? Because you have, trillions of these 3-meter spaces, boxes rather. How does that language process work? Let's start with the Vietnamese. Perhaps you can share the story of how that got kickstarted.
It's a good question. It's not like we just download a dictionary and then launch, which is what I think some people assume. It's a really, really thorough process. So in Vietnamese, we didn't hire 1 consultant, we hired 50 consultants.
Wow. All Vietnamese speakers?
All Vietnamese speakers, and importantly, natively Vietnamese speakers. And
were they based in the UK or kind of working remotely?
So we have people working remotely. And what's important for us when we do any language, Vietnamese is somewhat simpler in that respect, because it's mainly spoken in one country, but we will recruit them around to make sure that we're not sort of biasing our word list towards words that are only spoken in one country or something, if it's a language which covers many. And also just the diversity of thought, because people have different views about different words. And is that a good word? Is that a bad word? Is that a homophone? Words that sound the same but are spelled differently. And so we basically launch when we've got several people all having given an opinion on a per word basis. And in Vietnamese, we use a list of 25,000 words to cover the world, to cover the land on Earth. And so when you're looking at a word, that many Vietnamese speakers have all given a green tick to this word, going, yeah, this is a good word. It's spelt right. It's socially acceptable. And then we kind of amalgamate this massive data from our 50 consultants, which then gives us that 25,000 word list. But it's a long process. It takes us about 6 months, and that's with people working pretty intensely from those consultants to actually get a new language up and running. But once it's done, it's then done, because the 3 words never change, they're fixed. So you can't go back and go, oh, actually, I didn't mean this word. I meant this word. So that's why we have to just invest so much up front. But I guess hence the pride we have in the languages we launch, that we know we've done a really thorough job. And hopefully your listeners think the same about Vietnamese if they try it.
Oh, fantastic. I'll be looking for my What3words. I did not look at it before, but I wanted to wait until I got a good understanding of today. So I'll be downloading the app myself and finding those What3words right after this. Chris, thank you for joining the show.
Pleasure, Hal. Thanks so much for having me.
For those of you listening in, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Vietnam Innovators, this time with Chris Sheldrick, the CEO and co-founder of What3words. You heard it straight from him. He's hiring. So if you're keen to join his team, launch the whole Vietnamese market for What3words, give them a buzz. Their contact information will be shared on the description of today's podcast. Thanks, Chris, and we'll hope to see you back in Vietnam very soon.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Hal.
With a comprehensive healthcare ecosystem, GeoHealth integrates technology to optimize the examination experience for their customers. The Geo Smart Clinic provides a multi-specialty clinic experience with a team of elite doctors and cutting-edge technology. And with their recent Series B investment of up to $20 million, GeoHealth is coming closer to expanding their smart clinic system nationwide.